Hi, everybody. Welcome back again. This is our third and for now final in our series of Fireside Chats, and we're here with Villiers Steyn from the Safari Expert, or actually the Safari Expert.
How are you, Graham? Hi, everybody. It's great to be here.
It is, and I'm well, thank you. And it is great to have you with us. What I'll do is just for those. Oh, apologies. What I'll do is I will just start off by once again explaining what is going on for those that are not aware is that Juma, Yuri and Pippa Moolman at Juma, the owners of Juma, have decided to do a very limited series of expeditions, and we'll explain in a moment why they're called expeditions. And these are happening in September, October, November of this year. There are only 6 of them. Each is 5 days long. You come in on a Monday, you go out on a Saturday. Only 6 people per expedition, and each expedition is hosted by a expert safari guide. In this case, Villiers, who will be doing 2. Another 2 expeditions are being done by Nick de Jong, and another 2 are being done by Chris Stamper. All of this information is available at Juma.com. So just go on over there. You can see what's going on. The pricing, bookings are done on a per room basis. So it's at Tumbeta House. You book a room either for 2 people or 1 person. If whether it's for 2 or 1, your flights are included. So from Johannesburg to Hoedspruit, as well as your transfers from Hoedspruit to Juma, and then of course back again to Johannesburg. Each in addition to the safari host guide, there's also Aubrey Ngubeni, who has been a guide at Juma for a very long time, decades, who will be there to also assist. So you've got the best of both. All food is included. All non-alcoholic drinks are included. You can order drinks separately if you wish. And I think that's the housekeeping part. Oh, one critically important thing, of course, is that bookings open on Saturday afternoon, South African time, morning, obviously, or earlier in the day elsewhere in the world, on the West Coast and East Coast of the United States. We're going to operate on a sort of a strict first come first serve basis. So you want to be on that. You want to make sure that as that booking opens, you get your reservation in with your first choice and your second choice. And we'll be very strict on making sure that we stick to that. It's very well priced, so it's probably going to go quite quickly. So just make sure that you're poised at your desktop at that right moment to get those. And it is limited, as I said. There are only these expeditions. There's no guarantee this will even happen again next year. It's a one-off. Okay. Housekeeping out of the way. So Villiers, I'm going to ask you to give us a bit of a background on your history with Juma. You're obviously a photographer, a very accomplished photographer, and you've guided a lot of trips to Juma. Be good to know when you started doing it, and your story there.
My story with photography actually goes many, many years back. I was actually our high school photographer, believe it or not, and that's many, many moons ago. So I've had a love for photography ever since I was a schoolboy. But I really got to photograph wildlife when I started studying, and I studied nature conservation. And as part of my studies, I actually studied leopard behavior. I did my master's degree on leopard movements in a place called Mashatu Game Reserve in Botswana. And while I was busy doing that, I was obviously on the one side a scientist, but my true love lay with the photography. So much later in my life, I actually moved away from the academia and I became a travel writer. And as the travel writing kind of took me to lots of wonderful places, I ended up in the Sabi Sands, and I became a full-time photographic safari guide in 2013. But it's only in 2017 that I got the opportunity to start leading photographic safaris to Juma specifically. So I had the privilege of leading trips there, scheduled trips there in 2017, 18, and 19, basically until COVID hit. And I think we were there, I say we, because I led it with my co-host Lance van der Vyver, and we probably did 8 days a month, every month throughout the safari season. We were based at Juma. So Galago and Vuyatela was our home, and Hosana and Tingana and Tandi and Tlalamba were our subjects. So yes, that's basically my short 3-year relationship with Juma, was as a wildlife photography guide and host.
And quite an intense time. Did you ever stay at Tumbeta House, or were you?
So Tumbeta was basically renovated and came into being after we did our safaris. So we never used it for our clients. But knowing Yuri and Pippa very well, they actually live just down the road from me here in the Hoedspruit Wildlife Estate. I have had the opportunity to stay at Tumbeta House after the safaris. And I absolutely love it because it's a slightly smaller, you can't even really call it a lodge. It's a very, very intimate little space. Not that you feel crowded, it's just not as big as Vuyatela and Galago is. So yeah, I actually really, really like it, and it's got a lovely little water hole with a sunken hide in camp, which is quite nice to if you want to spend some time outside of game drive time, to spend time in, and a big beautiful deck that looks over like an open plain with some big marula trees. So whenever I'm not in the hide, I'm sitting up there with a cup of coffee, hoping that one of the leopards would walk down and jump in one of those trees. So actually really do love Tumbeta House.
No, so do I. So do I. We've got a long history and memory of it, but that's for another conversation. What I want to ask you is, did you know Karula, the leopard? Karula.
So before I went to Juma for the first time, or let me answer it like this. Karula had already passed away when I started guiding on Juma, but I was also a photographic guide next door at Elephant Plains for the 3 years prior to that, for a different photographic company. So we basically did our safaris from Elephant Plains, and as a lot of you will remember, Karula didn't really spend time that far west. But when I first started, and I think I've got to think carefully of the dates now, but I think it was in September or October 2013, there was a massive fire that came through the northern Sabi Sands, and it literally burned down the complete traversing of some of the lodges. And it was amazing to see how landowners that don't necessarily always sit around the same fire were saying, listen, you know what, this is really bad. Come and drive on our concession. And we had we were lucky enough that we were able to then drive a little bit further east. So my very first trip I led from Elephant Plains, we were actually allowed to drive all the way to the Kruger boundary. And I remember on that safari, and I think it was October 2013, I stand to be corrected, but I saw Karula for the first time. So yes, I did see her. I did not know nearly as well as I did Tandi. Tandi was basically the leopardess that we saw most regularly, and that was our sort of our go-to female for photography at the time that I spent at Juma.
And of course, Tandi is a daughter of Karula's.
Correct. I did see Shadow quite a few times.
Also a daughter.
Yes. So Shadow and Tandi Shadow was so elusive. We knew she was around, but she was so hard to find. Whereas Tandi, we just knew her territory so well. But of course, because we were based at Juma and very much aware of Wild Earth and people from all over the world that loved these leopards, it was very obvious to us how loved Karula was. So yeah, it was very interesting to see people's relationship with these animals through social media.
Absolutely. And then of course the big male when you were guiding there was Tingana. That was his.
That's correct. Tingana was basically our go-to male leopard for the area. And I say go-to male simply because he was so easy to photograph. If you could find him, you had a 9 out of 10 chance to get a great shot, because he was so relaxed and he was a real poser. He would often lie on a termite mound or literally just walk in the middle of the road. Whereas the other males from that period were males like Hukumuri, who was, I would almost say, always on the move, which makes it very hard to photograph him, not necessarily walking in the road like Tingana did.
Yeah.
He would cut a line straight into the thickets. But a lot of people may not have known some of the other males in the area, like Juma. Juma was a very shy male that used the area north of Juma into Buffelshoek. Maybe once or twice he would cross over into Juma itself. And much to our frustration, the tracks don't always tell you who you're tracking. So you spend 2 hours tracking Tingana only to find a very shy Juma. And that was always quite disappointing from a photographic point of view, but a great exercise in tracking skills for Fanote and William, who are usually our trackers. And then, of course, further to the east, there was Quarantine, who used Torchwood and Cheetah Plains and Koro, sort of that area, who was personally, I think, the most beautiful big male of the area, but very hard to find because he spent a lot of time in Kruger. And then later on, there was Mulwati, but he was a ghost. So that, I would say, my last few drives there, we saw glimpses of Mulwati. In fact, I forgot of one other male called Nklangula. I can't remember whether Nklangula ever came onto Juma specifically, but
a name I recognize.
So Nklangula, which means magic gwari in Shangaan, he used northern Buffelshoek. So he would cross over Lotu Manyeleti, super, super relaxed. And every now and again, when we were looking for cheetah and things like that in the open spaces of Buffelshoek, we would bump into Nklangula, and he was a very different looking male. He had quite a strange face. So those were the ones that we followed, but definitely Tingana was the male that we were always hoping we would bump in, into on drive.
And you mentioned that you would often see him on termite mounds. Did you? You must have seen him hunting on termite mounds at some point.
Yeah, on the odd occasion, we never actually saw a kill, but on the odd occasion, we would see him staking out a mound, where he's obviously waiting for a warthog to come out. But I always said to my clients, who they were usually 6 people on the back, is help us to find these animals. And the best way that you can do this is to check the termite mounds, when we're looking for someone like Tingana. So rather than being completely overwhelmed and thinking, well, where should I look? There's should I look under the trees or in the trees? Or, you know what, check the termite mounds first and then let your eyes go to the trees and so forth. Because not only Tingana, most of the leopards had this habit, early morning and late afternoon, just to get a little bit of height. That's usually why they did it. It's just to get above the grass layer, to get that little bit of elevation. And, more often than not, it was William, Fanote, or later on Mike, our trackers, that spotted them. But that's what I always tell people. And what I'll tell them again in November when I lead these expeditions, if you want to help us try and find the leopards who are active there now, start by checking the termite mounds.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously right that they all use that elevation to see what's going on. But Tingana in particular, he really specialized. I can't remember how many times, but many times we actually witnessed him being a successful hunter. That was his big thing. I mean, they all do it, but I think Tingana was a specialist, at that particular way of hunting.
Yeah, what I've sort of seen over the years is that you'll often find specific individuals will develop a habit where it either happens and they find it easy and then they go back to that, or it was learned from their parents or something like that. But, just like you find certain lion prides that specialize in giraffe or buffalo, the leopards seem to do the same. And you'll find some leopards that just avoid killing big prey, like impala or warthogs, and they'll live off steenbok and duiker because they're so readily available and so easy for them to catch. But yeah, I unfortunately never had the opportunity to see Tingana make a kill. And to be honest with you, in all those years, the 6 years that I guided in the Sabi Sands, I never saw a leopard take down an impala. I saw them stalk them hundreds of times, I want to say, but never the actual kill. But what I did see them do very often is kill small things like birds and hares. And again, I think a lot of people don't realize how many small things leopards catch because they're so opportunistic. They'll come across a guinea fowl, a flock of guinea fowl. They'll go down, wait for them to come past, jump up and grab one, and they'll finish it literally in 15 minutes. And you'd never know that it happened.
And I'll use that to get to, you know, the one that I really want to talk to you about, of course, is Hosana. And I'm going to use that as a segue to go to Hosana because, of course, he lost his mother, Karula, when he was quite young. And I actually don't remember exactly how old he was, but it was under a year. I'm pretty confident he was less than a year old, which is young for a leopard, you know, to lose their mother. Not impossible, as obviously it wasn't. He did make it. Unfortunately, his sister Shongile, she didn't make it, and we don't really know exactly what the story there was, but we know that she didn't make it. And in the beginning, the two of them, when she was still around, you know, they were surviving on terrapins. They were literally, that was their food.
So I was lucky enough to see Shongile a few times. It was the earlier days that I led safaris on Juma, and I think I saw her a handful of times. And she just had this very distinctive little face. You know, she looked like like almost like a stuffed toy in a good way. You know, big eyes, ears. She was absolutely gorgeous. And the last time I saw her was in I got to remember what tree it was. Falbos, Timinalia, close to Treehouse Dam. And we had literally passed underneath her when someone spotted her, you know, when you spot things with the eyes on the back of your head, something just tells you you've missed it. And someone turned around, look, leopard. And she was sitting right above us. And that, I think, it was either the last or second last time, because I remember another sighting of her on a termite mound on the Buffelshoek boundary, and she had caught a tree squirrel, and she was posing like an absolute champion on this termite.
Proud of herself. I mean,
just sitting there. And in fact, originally we didn't even see that she had this squirrel with her. So she killed it, but she didn't eat it. She just sat here with it. But Hosana, of course, we saw very, very regularly from a young age. And like you said, he managed to survive without his mother. And, you know, the wonderful thing about leopards is they're so opportunistic. So, you know, from a very young age, they are left alone for extended periods of time, days sometimes, when they're very, very young. So they learn to catch things like grasshoppers and lizards and things, and even francolins when they're still very, very young. And that obviously stood them in good stead. I think the biggest challenge for a young leopard or leopardess of their age when they lose their mother, it's other leopards and predators. In Hosana's case, he managed to avoid that conflict, whereas in Shongile's case, probably not. We don't know exactly what happened to her, but you might well find that she got into an altercation with another predator.
I remember that one of Hosana's very smart strategies around that was that when he was a bit older and he was making kills, he would give those kills up with no fight. And I think that's crucial. I think you know, if you're still young and small and you don't have a mother's protection, you've got to be able to give up your kill.
Street smarts. That's a very, very, very wise decision. And you mentioned that when I was still doing leopard research in Mashatu in the early 2000s, I actually came across a leopard carcass in a tree once, believe it or not, half eaten, and looked at all the tracks. And what had happened was there was a half-eaten impala in the tree, and this young female leopard half-eaten next to it, and then tracks for a big male. And my assumption there was that she had made this kill, she hoisted it, this male came around, she tried to defend it, and in the process she got killed, just fatally wounded. And with the male being as opportunistic as he was, right, let's eat her as well. So not that they're true cannibals, but they've certainly proven that they would eat whatever they can find. But just proof again that exactly what you said, if you stand up for yourself when you're still too young, you can run into some very serious trouble, especially against another leopard, because remember, then it becomes a lot harder for you to hide. You can't just run up a tree as a young Singile and think that a Tingana or a Hukumuri is not going to get to you. They're going to get to you quite easily.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the other thing that was really interesting about Hosana, and this is the part that I wanted to talk to you about. Now, I apologize in advance, because what I'm about to say, and I think you know what I'm about to say, is probably deeply unsupported by any form of science. And and it's a purely emotional opinion, but it's one that I did develop over time. And a lot of the people that are watching right now are Juma Cam followers that have been following that Juma Cam for years and years and years, and also watching the Wild Earth game drives, of course, but also watching the Juma Cam. And what Hosana did, as you know, is he spent a long period of time right there underneath that camera or around that waterhole, and he lived there. He camped out there, and I mean, first let's deal with the logical part. That makes sense. There's water. There's food, there are comings and goings, but it's also dangerous because what you were saying, lions, wild dogs, leopards. I mean, it's not just a case of you're sitting there, you're in a trafficked area. So I developed this thought that what was going on here was that he'd been left by his mom. And he just felt that at that place, there was a whole lot of consciousnesses. I don't think he thought it was people that were rooting for him, that were on his side, that cared for him. And that somehow, while he was at that tree, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking. I mean, it's not rational, but I just somehow feel that cat felt something. So my question to you is this, why would he do that?
Well, so first of all, I was lucky enough to be there when this happened. So a lot of people would have watched it, would have streamed it or heard about it or saw some old posts on Facebook or wherever. But we were there when it happened, where we ran our safaris out of Gallagher and Vuyatela, but our guest stayed at Vuyatela. And lo and behold, Hosana shows up and he does not leave. He literally... It was like he lay under the camera for weeks.
Yeah, he did.
And we would actually lead an 8-day safari, go home to Hoedspruit, come back the next month to host the next back-to-back, and guess who's there? Hosana. Yeah. So, I mean, there was no doubt that was very, very strange. And, I'm obviously a scientist at heart, so I'm trying to figure it out from a ecological, behavioral point of view. But there's no doubt in my mind that he felt safe there. He wouldn't have spent that much time there otherwise. And what you have to remember for a young male like that, he doesn't have other duties like patrolling his territory or anything like that. So, if it was a Tingana or a Hukumuri, they couldn't afford to stay in one place for that long. They would lose, drastic portions of their territory over that time if they did that. Whereas Hosana had the luxury to hang out at camp where he obviously felt very, very safe. So what I've wondered about it a lot, because you and I spoke about this very briefly last night when we caught up, is, so I've been thinking about it for the last 24 hours, is what happened to him? Because he went away for a long time. And as a lot of you will know, Juma is a relatively small property. So there are times where we don't see these animals and they're on a neighboring property, but we don't get feedback all the time of exactly where they are and what they're doing. But the only thing I can imagine is he must have had a very, very dramatic, traumatic incident with another leopard somewhere. I can only imagine it must have been with another leopard, either an altercation with a different male or whatever it might be. And he decided, you know what, I'm going to go back to where I was born, where I feel safest, and spend some time there. So he's almost kind of recuperating. But I kept on thinking to myself, I wonder how unique this really is. And now thinking back at everything that I've seen over the years, the one thing that I've learned about young male leopards is that they do a lot of weird things. So doing weird things for a young male leopard, things that are not necessarily in the field guides that we read when we're younger, is actually not a strange thing. So I was maybe not as surprised by Hosana coming to lie under the dam camp for a month as I was for him not being kicked out. So the fact that Tingana, who was at that stage very much the dominant male around camp, with Hukumuri, maybe Hukumuri did come up to the camp itself, but that those two male leopards, and especially Tingana, didn't say to him, listen, bugger off. that was the strange bit for me. And
interesting. So let me just riff off of that for a second. Maybe there's two things going on here that gave Hosana this real advantage. The one thing was that he wasn't traversing around Tingana's territory, because that would have irritated Tingana. Okay, so literally the fact that Hosana stayed in a very small area made him appear less threatening to Tingana. And then secondly, if he got a kill, he gave it to Tingana. So Tingana's attitude was, well, why should I fight this cat? There's a risk I get injured. He's not threatening my territory, and he's doing my hunting for me.
Well, so another way to look at it, and this is what was very interesting about doing leopard research, is when you start analyzing the way that a leopard utilizes its territory, you actually find that there's quite a large degree of overlap. So a territory is something you actively defend, and a home range is an area that you live in. So for the females, to a very large degree, there's big overlap, and you'll see Tundi here today, but Shadow there tomorrow, and then maybe you'll see Shadulu, and they'll use the same area. But what I learned from my studies, where we actually did radio collar leopards for a certain amount of time before we removed it, to see exactly where they move, is that there are certain areas within that home range that they actively defend. And those are areas that we call them core areas. Yeah. And those will often be places with good den sites, big food sources, water, etc. And the interesting thing was always going to try and find out, why are they using these areas specifically? So what I'm trying to get to is that perhaps Vuyatela, the dam there, that specific area around the camera, was not necessarily a core area for Tingana, in the sense that within his greater home range and territory, he felt like, it's okay actually for Hosana to be there, but had he spent more time at Buffelshoek Dam or at Twin Dams or whatever it might be, that would be a no-no, and perhaps that would cause an altercation. And you might very well find that that was kind of the edge of Tingana's territory, because remember, Tingana moved quite far north from Juma. It didn't go very far south from there. Tingana moved up to Buffelshoek Dam, sometimes deep into Buffelshoek, up to the Manuleti boundary. I've seen him. And Hukumuri came from the west. So Hukumuri we would find on Triple M, and sometimes he would come as close as the Juma sign right outside camp. But very seldom did we see him go further. So I think we were kind of on the edge of a territory there. So Hosana found himself on the edge of Hukumuri and Tingana's territory. And for the lack of a better word, maybe he was in no man's land and we didn't realize it. And that was why they left him alone. But interestingly enough, Graham, for these young males to come back to their natal range, I've seen it here in the Hoedspruit Wildlife Estate where I live, which is an hour's drive from Juma, and it's right on the edge of the Greater Kruger. But we live in a little suburb in the bush. But when I first started monitoring the leopards here, where I live on our little estate with trail cameras, there was a female called Kulua, and she had two little cubs, and I named them Mafu and Mila. And when Mafu he was about 2.5 years old, as we expected, he got kicked out of the area by the dominant male at that stage. And I thought, right, that's it. I'm never going to see him again. But there was a massive turnover of males in that time. Junior, Mawuzi, a few other ones. And maybe because we live in such a fragmented area where there's now farming and other things happening here as well, those males just never kept their territory here in the wildlife estate. And the day that Mawuzi left, who came back? Mafu. Mafu came back as an adult to his natal range because it's an area that he knows. And he's now the dominant male here where he was born.
So question on that, and then something to say. Do you know where he went when he left that natal range initially?
No, we don't know. And that's the frustrating thing. Yeah. And why at the moment there is a wonderful citizen science project here around town by the Ingwe research program, whereby we are trying to use other people's trail cameras and guides and people who come across leopards, and we try and figure that out. But that's what's been so wonderful about social media, how we learned that Hukumuri was born, I think, Southern Kruger or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was. And that Quarantine moved deeper into Kruger and was seen close to Nhlanguleni picnic site. And I kind of kept a side eye on those things. I'd be lying if I said I followed it on a daily basis, but I always ended up with those juicy little news of dispersal, because I love leopard dispersal. And those young males, and to a certain degree the females, but mostly the young males, they're the ones that spread the genes. And it's when a Tingana is supposed to fight with a Hosana, that Hosana is supposed to move far, far away and spread those genes elsewhere. And like you said here, the weird thing was that he came straight back and then wasn't kicked out by, presumably his father.
But now, so let's talk about that dispersal part. So there was two parts to this Hosana dispersal. He hung out by the waterhole, the dam cam, and he grew up, and he got away with it. Whatever the reason was, he got away with it. But then the time came for him to disperse, and whether that was because Tingana put pressure, or somebody else did, or something else happened, we will never know. But he did move off. And he was gone, and he was gone for a while, and we didn't hear anything. But then we heard that he had settled in the southern part of the Singita Londolozi area, mostly Singita, but still also into Londolozi, but on the southern end of that of their traverse. And then he was there for a while, and so we heard, well, that's it. He's found a territory. He's a big cat, and obviously he was able to squeeze out a territory. And then, I'm sure others will remember. Maybe we can ask over here. But a period of time went by, and it was many months. I don't know how many, but a long time. And then he came back.
Yeah, something happened there. I'm telling you now. One of those big males along the Sand River probably gave him the biggest, fight of his life, and he just said, "You know what? I'm hightailing it back." I remember the day that Tristan found him on Triple M.
Yeah.
Heading back home. And he would never have forgotten that. Would never forgotten that. And what I also found when I was doing leopard research, the leopards that I followed wore GPS collars. And what's wonderful about a GPS collar is it gives you the opportunity to find out what happens when you're not tracking in their territory. Because historically, where we just use VHF collars, you're leaving from your camp, and then you're searching in the area where you think they are. And if you don't find them, you think, they're probably in a hole or maybe behind a rock or something. That's why we're not finding them. Whereas in actual fact, they go on a foray. And it's very often that a young male, when they start dispersing, they'll do the star-like or this finger-like dispersal, checking out different areas. So let's say this was Hosana's natal range, and now so that would have been Karula's range.
Yeah,
that's where he then hung out. Then he would start testing these different areas, or perhaps he went down further south. But every now and again, he'll go there and you won't know about it. Let's say he goes all the way up into Klaseri or into the Timbavati, and then he'll come back, and that's just exploration. But now I'm thinking about it. What you actually have to remember, which was a little bit different for Hosana, was the first leopard that starts pushing a young male out of their area is their mother. Because at some stage she decides, you know what, I'm not going to share my kill with you anymore. And Hosana didn't have that. So that's also why he's a little bit of a different boy, is because he didn't have that mother pushing him out of about 2.5 years, sometimes even younger. And you'll see their mother get really aggressive towards both the male and the female. The females hang around because their mothers tolerate them. The males don't, because the big males don't tolerate them. So Hosana, just because of Karula dying at such a young age, a young age for him, I should say, things were just a little bit different for him.
They were, and you know what? I'm sure that if we had all the facts, we would find that there's a perfectly scientific explanation for his behavior. But Villiers, I'm not letting go of my belief. He just knew there were millions of people around the world that were rooting for his success.
Isn't it crazy that we're sitting here, 5 years later, reminiscing about a leopard, and we have a name for him? Isn't it wonderful? I mean, these were not only superstars, globally recognized leopards, but for us they were like family. You know, when you found one, when you didn't find one anymore, and you assumed they had died, or sometimes we had heard that they had passed away. I mean, it literally brought tears to our eyes because we spent so much time with them. And I'm not surprised that people get emotional about it. We just have a connection with them. Yeah. And secretly, I'm super, super excited for hopefully seeing Tlalamba again, because as some of you may have seen, I'm not sure whether it has been posted yet, but when I was there in January 2018, I wasn't even leading a trip with clients. I was visiting a friend's in the Juma area, and we went out on a game drive, and I saw Tlalamba for the first time when she was a little nunu like this. I think we estimated she was about 6 weeks old. It was the 2nd of January 2018. Wow. So I had the privilege of watching Tlalamba grow up. You know, and what a special thing to see a tiny little leopardess become a mother and a success,
and is now a queen.
Absolutely. So for me personally, I obviously really, really hope to see her. I knew Marips as well, so I saw him later years after COVID. I did lead some other trips in the area to places like Chitwa, and I saw Marips a few times. So there most certainly will still be a few of what was then young leopards that are now the dominant leopards in the area that we should stand a chance to see, because if I understand correctly, we probably have the chance to traverse Torchwood as well to the east of Juma. Yeah. So it's not just Juma itself; it's all the way to the Kruger boundary in the east, and I love that area. Even though Torchwood is a little bit denser than Juma itself, there are a few very special places there, like First and Second Rock.
Yeah, of course.
Not only great sundowner spots and coffee spots, but just almost spiritual spots when you go and stand there, just to experience, you know, the northern Sabi sands. And I feel quite lucky because I'm leading the November trips, and in mid-November, I think the first one is from the 10th and the second one from the 17th of November. And what I would expect is that we probably would have had the first rains, typically in the Lowveld. So September, typically still very dry. October could go either way. If there's early rains, it starts greening. If not, it's very hot and dry, but special in its own way, because visibility is so good and tracking is so easy, and it's dusty and very, very dramatic. Whereas in the early to mid-November, you typically have beautiful greenery, much like your background behind you.
Yeah, that must have been taken because that's Juma Dam. I don't get out of the way.
That where you have sort of fairways where you just have short grass coming out, but not tall grass yet, so it doesn't affect visibility too much. But as a photographer, you have a lot more color in your scenes. And typically on the 15th of November, the woodland kingfishers arrive. So you have the sounds of summer as well. And even though there's an outside chance that you might have a bit of rain, a sprinkle or two, it's a very, very special time of the year. And for me, it's got that feel of abundance. The first impala lambs may even have dropped if rain was early, or at least the ewes will be ready to burst. It's a very special time of the year. So really looking forward to looking for specific leopards at a really nice time of the year. And don't forget the lions and the hyenas and all the other beautiful things. I think it's important to mention to people that we're certainly not, at least from my point of view, not just going to be looking for leopards for 10 drives in a row. We'll make sure to look for elephants, lions, spend time at the hyena den if there's an active one, and also go to some of those famous places like Treehouse Dam. Man, I can just park off there for a whole morning. It's just something special about it. And go to those places that a lot of people will hopefully know and love. Just also to have this opportunity again to set foot on a first rock or have sundowners by a Buffelshoek Dam.
Absolutely, I'm jealous just hearing you talk about it. Actually, but it is an amazingly special place. The one other thing that you will also have, which I'm not sure that you've ever experienced, Villiers, but you will find it a bit different, is that the guests that you will have with you are going to know a great deal about these animals and this place, and have a real emotional connection, not just to the idea of a leopard.
Yeah.
but to individuals, not just to the idea of a hyena den, but to the long stories of these. And I think that that's one of the things that is so amazing about what Wild Earth has achieved, is really getting people to empathize with individual animals. And it's definitely, something quite unique and special.
Well, so in my time at Juma, we were obviously very focused on photography, and that's a very specific type of client. We've got people that paid a lot of money and came specifically with, maybe they want a leopard lying on a branch and they want to photograph it in good light. But most definitely, because we were running these safaris when Wild Earth was active there, we did get quite a few Wild Earth followers that came with. And what I found so special about it was I had the opportunity to learn a lot.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't necessarily following it live like they were, for many different reasons, most of it being because I had no connectivity being out on safari all the time. But I kind of see these expeditions running in a very similar way, where I come from a photography and science backgrounds, where I love and absolutely thrive when it comes to animal behavior and ecology. And I've got a lot to share from that point of view. And then we've got people coming who, like you just said, who come with the knowledge about individuals, where I will learn a lot. And don't forget about Aubrey, our guide, who I know very, very well, and I can't wait to spend some time with. But he obviously comes, and from the searching and tracking and from a different kind of expertise. And I've always found that if you put those kind of people together, even though we all are there not necessarily for different reasons, because I think there's a very big overlap, but let's call it with different backgrounds. The synergy is just amazing, because I promise you what will happen is we're going to sit talking like you and I have now, reminiscing, trying to understand, maybe dreaming a little bit about what we might see the next day, the whole day. So yeah, really looking forward to it. And the way that it's been structured, just being 6 people, nice small group, which is half the size that I used to guide, it's going to make for a really intimate experience. I'm not joking when I'm saying I can't wait. I can't wait.
Well, there we go. So I'll tell you what we'll do is let's have let's answer some questions. So I'm not going to go backwards really, but if let me get this chat going over here. If you guys, if you really want to ask some questions of Villiers, let's get them going. And if you've seen, those who are in chat, if you've seen a question that was posed earlier that we didn't touch on, or would have been nice to have expanded on, just kind of copy it on, even if it wasn't yours.
So I see someone here. Someone asked here, which season have we seen most leopards? So I'm assuming the question is, what's the best time of the year to see leopards on Juma?
Yeah.
Having led safaris in Juma in every season of the year, I can tell you now, there's no bad time to look for leopards. The wonderful thing about leopards is that they are highly territorial, and that means that they're not necessarily going to leave an area just because the season has changed. You'll find that with other predators. Leopards need very little. Small home ranges, they just need water, shelter, and food. So I don't actually think there is a bad time for leopards in Juma. But what I can say is visibility certainly is better during the dry season. So September, October visibility is going to be at its best. November, when I'm leading the safaris, it will start greening up. I don't think visibility is going to be poor because it's too early for the grass to be tall. Tracking might just become ever so slightly more difficult because of grass cover. But like I said, it has other advantages whereby it's maybe a little bit prettier. So the photographer in me is really excited about that.
I agree with you on all of that. Somebody, Stephanie, saying that leopard family changed the way I saw leopards. Well, big cats in general. I was very hurt at the loss of them and stopped watching for a while. Stephanie, I didn't stop watching, but I agree with you. It is by us really getting involved in the stories of these animals that we can build that emotional connection. Yeah. Somebody else mentions that you're a great storyteller, Villiers, and you are. And it's those two things are very closely related, because all of us as human beings, we actually learn through storytelling. So for us, it's very important in a story to have characters, because it's a lot easier to build a narrative and to understand what's going on through the behavior of individuals. Sometimes we even get to understand the rules, not that there are rules, but the generalized behavior of an animal by seeing the exceptional behavior of an individual. So it's
absolutely. And I'm going to say it now, the word, but their personalities come through, or their, whatever you want to call it, the creaturalities come through. And I mean, when we were following these animals, we just knew what they were going to do. And the funny thing was, so many times, in fact, I said it in our briefings, and I'll say it again on the expeditions. I always said, guys, trust the system. And what I meant by that is, between myself and Aubrey, we got to know these animals so well that Tandi would be walking that way, but we wouldn't follow her because we knew she's going to pop out there. So to then say to people, you know what, we know this animal, just give us 5 minutes, rather than driving in behind her and seeing her bum. Let's go around. We know where she's going to pop out. And it's that kind of intimate relationship with these animals that actually makes for great game viewing.
No, it does. Jive Bunny saying we love Villiers' Safari Expert videos. So you have Safari Expert followers.
Thank you very much.
Did you ever Ubomba girl wants to know if you ever met Mvula?
Yes, I did meet Mvula. My goodness, now you're taking me down a trip. It's a trip down memory lane. For those of you who don't know, Mvula was a big male leopard, dominant in that area a little bit before. I think he and Tingana probably did, share edges of territories for a while. But I know Mvula from sort of 2013, 14. So by the time I was leading trips on Juma, Mvula was spending most of his time east on Nkoro, Chitwa, that area. And shame, he was an old guy at that stage, all droopy. But in his day, massive male leopard. Very much would have been Tingana's competition to the east. So yes, I did know Mvula. I got some beautiful photos of him. And then I see Wildabout Safari just above that asked which lion prides have we followed the most? And we haven't really spoken about the lions, but obviously in the Juma area, it's the Nkuhuma pride and the Talamati pride were the two prides that, at least in the time that I spent there, we followed the most. I'm completely out of date with the lion dynamics at the moment. So I'll probably have to catch up with Aubrey to find out about that. But the Nkuhuma pride was the pride that lived around camp and that would kill a buffalo down by the waterhole in front of the camera, and that were just very easy to find and to follow. Whereas the Talamati pride, because they lived half of their time in the Manyeleti, where we couldn't drive, and half the time further south into Buffelshoek and sometimes into Juma, they were a little bit harder to find. But I enjoyed finding them because they were often in very open areas. Juma is quite dense, whereas Buffelshoek is quite open. Now, unfortunately, we don't have traversing in Buffelshoek anymore, but it was quite a treat to follow the Talamati pride. But I would, to answer the question, most certainly the Nkuhuma pride was the pride that we followed most often because they lived around camp. But unlike the leopards, there would be some safaris. In those days, it was 8 days at a time, 4 days back to back. We wouldn't see a single lion because, unlike leopards, they need more. They need more bigger areas because they eat bigger prey. So if the buffalo move, the lions move. So yes, the Nkuhuma pride were the lions that we saw the most. And the Avoca males were the males that were dominant over that time. When I first arrived, it was the Birmingham boys. But in early 2017, whoop, here arrives the 3 Avoca boys. And they just managed. They managed to take over. And for most of the time that I was there, those were the dominant male lions that we searched for and photographed.
No, I remember that. A thought just crossed my mind. The Birmingham males, the Avoca males, I think the Nkuhumas also all came from the north down south. I mean, I know that lions aren't necessarily your area of academic research, but is that a coincidence, do you think? Or
well, what you might find, and I'm really spitballing here because you're putting me on the spot, but what I think is that in terms of lion numbers, you'll probably find that there's more lions north of Juma than south of Juma. And the reason for that is south, it's much denser. Further north, it opens up. You've got Buffelshoek, the Manyeleti is vast and open, and so is it further up into southern Timbavati. And those open areas attract tons of buffalo, zebra, wildebeest, their main prey source. And I remember during COVID when all of us were stuck watching live safaris, Tintwalu Safari Lodge had their on the beat safari. And one day they said that there were 80 different lions using Manyeleti, up to 80 different lions using Manyeleti itself. And for a 21 to 23,000 hectare reserve, that's a boatload of lions. So what happens is these pride sizes grow very, very quickly because of all this food, but they just cannot sustain themselves. You know, no lion pride dynamics is stable when they cross 20 members. So you'll hear about it, 24 lions on the S100 near Satara in the Kruger National Park, or 26 lions on the River Pride near Tlaseri, but they don't stay that big for long. Very quickly they get fragmented, and the ones that get kicked out, they have to go somewhere. And you might find that Juma was taking some of these lions coming from these high lion density areas. So you have the breakaway this and the breakaway that. I remember the word breakaway right throughout my Sabi Sands career as a photographic safari guide. There were lots of breakaway prides, the Kumbula breakaway pride, the Nkuhuma breakaways, the whatever breakaway prides. And it's because I think it's because these prides just got so big. I mean, the Nkuhumas on a good day, I think we had up to 16 of them together, if the males were with them, and you counted them as part of the pride, and then you saw them, there they go, they got a buffalo. And so they were a force to be reckoned with, Nkuhumas, and they loved buffalo. Remember we spoke earlier about specialists and how, you know, some of them, Tingana likes warthogs, the Nkuhuma pride like buffalo. And we had a standing joke, if we saw a lone buffalo, we call them the Daga boys, if you see a lone one, you say goodbye, because the next morning it's going to be legs in the air with 14 lions on top. The lions would follow them.
Well, I will. You know, having seen lots of prides of lions, and not just in the Juma area, but you know, all over the place. I've got a sort of a view that they all love buffalo, but the pride has to be above a certain size, number one, before they can realistically, you know, make that work. But they also need a couple of lionesses in that pride that have just got that extra bit of courage.
Absolutely, and the lionesses are key. Those three Avoca boys, in 3 years, not once did I see them take part in a buffalo kill. They would follow them, but they were scaredy cats. It was the lionesses and the Nkuhuma pride that were the forces.
And they've got to be courageous. I mean, because you know, and I've seen lots of lions. I mean, in the Mara, it's much more in the Masai Mara. It's a lot clearer to see because there's just a lot more hunting going on. So you get to watch a pride of lions hunt a lot more often. And obviously, as you know, 80% of the time they're unsuccessful. But it's always the same lioness that leads the hunt, that starts the hunt, that takes the risk, that gets out there. And so you've just got to have that lioness in the pride that's willing to take on a buffalo, which is obviously super dangerous. And then you've got to have enough sort of muscle behind her to to finish the job. And the minute the pride gets to that point, they become buffalo specialists.
But the challenge for the Nkuhuma pride was the fact that the buffalo in the Sabi Sands, they move out of the Sabi Sands for certain times of the year. Because there's just not enough grass. It's too dense. So what happens is you'll find those big herds, they'll just move out. Sometimes the whole Sabi Sands is devoid of herds of buffalo. And much to the frustration of the poor guides who are trying to show people the big five and calling each other in for one buffalo standing under a tree. But those lions weren't going to follow those buffalo. They might do it on a local basis within their territory or their home range, but they're not going to follow them deep into Kruger. So the Nkuhuma pride, we saw them kill impala. Lions eat a lot of impala. People just don't realize it because they eat them so quickly. But they would hunt lots of zebra and waterbuck and kudu and things like that as well. But
warthog. Warthog are
Yeah,
a common.
absolutely. Lions love killing warthogs.
Yeah, yeah.
And for a lion, it's probably a lot less risky than for a leopard because they just have that size. For a leopard, it's risky to kill a warthog because there's always the danger of those tusks damaging them. And just because of the sheer size of the warthog, the boars especially. But a lioness is they're just too big and strong. So yeah, I've seen that before where they'll do the same thing. They won't even stake out the burrow. They'll just go in. They'll dig them out straight, head first, dig them out, take whoever they can find.
Yeah, but lions have an advantage over leopards. A leopard cannot afford an injury, whereas a lion can. It can afford
That
an
pride
injury.
structure, it's amazing. I tell you what, the amount of lions that I saw that I thought to myself, yeah, this is probably the last time I'm going to see you, my dear. 2 weeks later, spick and span, just need a bit of recovery time. You take the bench for 2 weeks, let the others do the hunting. Big cats recuperate and recover so quickly. Nature is amazing. We saw animals do the strangest things. You'll have a little lion cub with a lame back and then it drags itself. And you think to yourself, this is terrible. What's happening? 2 weeks later, it's fine. And nature just goes like this. And the animals just have a way to persevere. A wild dog with 3 legs and it runs as fast as the rest. Hyena walking on 2 legs, picking his back legs up and just walking on his front legs, just balances out. It's crazy.
So a little story on that, which has stayed with me for years, and I can't remember who it was. Doesn't really matter. But one of the many viewers, and over the years, I've had so many wonderful messages sent to me. But this one lady wrote to me and said that she had been living with extreme chronic pain. And I don't know what the technical terms are, but it's sort of like undiagnosed, incurable, extreme levels of pain, not responsive to medication. And it was just really, really, really difficult to deal with. And watching the daily safaris was her escape, and it was just kind of just the way to get away from the difficulty. And she was quite locked in. She wasn't able to leave her home or anything like that. It was an untreatable for many years. And I don't know which leopard it was. I can't remember the details of it, but she watched the leopard get very badly injured. Really badly injured, and she could empathize with the amount of pain that cat must have been experiencing. But the leopard didn't slow down, didn't stop, couldn't. There's no option in nature. And I'm not saying that pain's psychological. I think that's a step too far. But what she said was, just watching that cat recover over a short period of time, a week or two, it wasn't long. She was able to reduce her pain by half.
Amazing. Yeah?
Just by learning from nature that you just get going. You've no choice. You don't sit and focus in on your own difficulties. You realize that life is, to be lived.
Yeah. Well, Graham, you just have to spend 2 days in the bush after a month in the city, and you feel rejuvenated, you feel energized, you feel calmer. It's half the reason I do what I do. Yes, I love taking photographs. Yes, I love seeing leopards, but I live a stress-free life because I'm surrounded by animals. So yeah, I get it. It's amazing, but I get it.
Well, you're very lucky, and it's been great chatting with you, Villiers. Thank you very much. Really, such deep insights, and your passion for nature and wildlife and Juma and the various cats is obvious, and I hope that some of the people watching today, do book on Saturday to join you. I certainly would. It'll be an amazing trip, and thanks very much for agreeing to do this. And
it's only a pleasure. Thank you. It's to you and to Yuri and Papa and everybody involved. It's a real privilege to have the opportunity not only to go back to Juma, but also to take care of these people and hopefully make some dreams come true for people who thought they might never have the opportunity. So yeah, looking forward to seeing 12 of you there in November later this year.
Excellent. Well, there we go. Thank you, everybody, for joining us once again. That's it for the Fireside Chat. So I'm going to say, don't forget, Saturday afternoon, 3rd of May, this coming Saturday, You want to be poised in front of your desktop, ready to go. We will definitely, stick to first come, first serve basis. What I will also be doing is I will be sharing 10 episodes of Juma Diaries that Chris did, I don't know, 20 years ago. I've got them all and I've got them ready. I'll put them out later on. And also, Villiers has been very kind to do us a short little video, which I've got. You're going to love it, which I'll also put out on YouTube and on Facebook. It's Villiers talking about some of the beautiful photographs that he's taken at Juma in the past. Thank you very much, Villiers, and we'll chat soon. But keep well, sir. Thank you very much.